How we doing? My name is Chef John Bell. We are doing our second video, and we are calling it Quarantine Cuisine. And I want to just impart a little bit of history. My last video was on a show that inspired me, Podark. This is kind of similar. It's a little bit about the history that we've been watching a lot on TV, but more importantly, the history of food. So we're going to do a little bit of French and Asian fusion food. Our menu is going to consist of steak au poivre, which is a classic French dish. But most people don't realize how many ingredients come from China and Asia that we use on a regular basis. I'll go through that as we go throughout the video. So like I said, our entree is a steak au poivre, which is a classic French dish with peppercorns and a brandy cream sauce. We're going to be doing a braised bok choy, and it is braised, or it's actually roasted, and it is roasted with a herb Salee, and it's made with ginger. Herb Salee is a Canadian French herb mixture of different fresh herbs ground up with a little bit of oil. There's a little sweet red pepper in there, salt, pepper, fresh ginger, and lemongrass to give it that Asian flavor, and a little spicy pepper from my garden as well. So we're going to coat those vegetables, and we're going to roast them, give it a little Asian flair, and then we're going to do a classic rice pilaf with a little twist. We're going to use lemon thyme to give it a little more acidity or a little lemon flavor to kind of counterbalance everything else that's with that. But we're going to start first is we're going to go ahead and get our rice going first because it takes the longest. We have our pan getting started now. We're going to use a little bit of butter. Most of my students realize I am a chef. I'm a certified executive chef through the American Culinary Federation. I've spent the last 35 years as a member, and I'm an advocate of certification. The butter we're using is actually Pluga butter. They are a huge sponsor of the ACF, and it is near and dear to my heart. I think that, especially through this time period, the importance of keeping together as chefs and people, it'll help us go back to normal in all the restaurants that people really love and places they like to eat. So we're going to start with a little bit of fresh butter. We have some fresh onions, locally grown from within about 100 miles of our house in Claremont, Florida. Everything we buy is coming from Dirty Dog Organics, and Aubrey is an awesome person with her family that grows everything fresh. So we have our onions. We're going to put a little bit of shallot in there just for a little bit of flavor. And we're going to sweat those onions. Basically, people aren't always sure on terms of cooking. Sweating is just softening the ingredient in either butter or oil. The biggest difference is an onion has a lot of water. Actually, all vegetables do. When I want to caramelize onions, I do not want to stir them and release the water because that actually pours out all the moisture, and it takes forever to get that sugars out of there. So when we sweat it, we actually want to pull out that moisture. We want to get that onion flavor in the rice so it doesn't brown and give the rice a horrible color. So by sweating it, we're going to stir it constantly to soften them up and get the flavor into the butter. That is really important. Whereas if we're going to caramelize it, like I said, we want to let it brown. Now, as we're waiting for that to go, we have our rice pre-measured. It's a cup of long grain rice. It's basic rice in the United States. You can use anything you want. Basmati. You use brown rice. It's a little bit different. If you're using wild rice, you have to stir it a little bit more often. Florida doesn't really have any wild rice, but a lot of states do. So we have our rice pre-measured. Now, onions actually come from China. Most people don't know that. It's used in every cuisine in the world. So that is absolutely an Asian influence into the cooking. The French, Italians, you name a country or a cuisine, even Russians use onions in their food. So it's a huge influence. So our onions, we let them sweat a little bit. You want to get that nice sweetness smell from the onions and the butter. We're going to put our rice in there. The idea of rice pilaf, it's actually a style of cooking. We're going to let that soak up that butter. We have some fresh thyme, some English thyme, and lemon thyme that we're going to put in with our rice as well. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to coat the rice, and we want to actually cook it in that oil. And what it's going to do is going to coat those grains of rice. And basically, You're cooking it for a few minutes on that heat. We have it on about 6 on an electric stove, so like a medium flame to start it off. Now, rice pilaf is, like I said, it's a system of cooking rice. Traditionally, it is with chicken stock, which I have some pre-made chicken stock right here that we're going to add in a few minutes. You can either finish on top of the stove or bake it. Either way works. Traditionally, it is always chicken stock. If you're vegetarian or vegan, you can use a vegetable stock. Onions make a great flavor. If you want to pre-cook some onions in some water to get that flavor, you can use pretty much any vegetables, carrots, onions, celery to make a nice veggie stock. You can even put some spinach in it for some color. So we're basically coating that rice, and we want the rice to crack. It is a grain. By letting it cook like that for a couple minutes, it'll actually crack the grain a little bit so that when you do cook it and bake it or finish it on the top, those flavors are going to actually extract into the rice and give you a much fluffier rice, a much more flavorful rice, and overall give you a much better product. A lot of people, when they make rice, it becomes really sticky. They're not sure why. Some people like to wash the rice to take that starch off. You don't necessarily have to wash it. It is a choice if you want to. So what we're doing is we're letting it coat. And whatever amount of rice you use, I don't care pretty much what kind of rice it is, you want to use double the amount of liquid as you do the actual rice itself. So if you have a cup of rice, we'll do 2 cups of water. If you have 2 cups of rice, 4 cups of water, and so on. All right, so like I said, we have our chicken stock. I didn't completely measure, but we're pretty close. So we're just going to add just a little bit of water to balance that out to exactly 2 cups. So once our rice is ready and we got the little flavors and we get that rice a little toasted in that pan, usually takes about 5 minutes to do that. So we have that nice and going. You can actually, I know you can't smell it on the phone or the video, but you can smell the lemon that's coming out of that from the thyme. It's actually really prevalent, and it's going to add a nice acidity or a nice flavor that's going to balance out with the sauce that we're going to make with the steak and the brandy, and it'll also blend really well with the garlic and ginger roasted bok choy. So we're going to add our chicken stock. You should hear a nice sear. It'll bubble. Once we have that in, I'm going to stir it a couple times briefly. We're going to do that. We're going to let it sit. And we're going to cover the pot, and I'm going to lower it to about 3. Between 3 and 4. I want it to come to a boil, then I'm going to bring it down to about 2. And once it starts boiling, once I see the liquid half gone, I'm going to actually shut it off because it takes about 10 minutes for the burner to cool. And it'll slowly cook with just its heat inside the rice, and it'll be a nice fluffy rice that way. So we have our rice going. Okay, next, what I have here is my students are required to do several techniques. They're required to do 2 cooking techniques. A lot of people aren't familiar with cooking techniques. Depends on who you ask and what you're looking for. The basic cooking techniques, saute is in a little oil. That's actually a French style of cooking. A little oil as hot as possible where you sear it quickly. Roasting is something in the oven. It's similar to bacon. Grilling, which is a dry heat, could be on a grill. It could be on a flat top, char grill. Poaching. Braised is where you sear something, add water. Stewing is in a liquid. So these are techniques that kids can use, or you can use at home. The last dish I did was a braised dish. So what I have for my knife cuts, which are required, and a lot of people are scared with knives. Having a good knife is important. Last time I used a handmade knife. This is my Wilhelm. It's completely balanced. It's a beautiful knife. They're not cheap. They're not usually used at home. But a good reasonable knife at home would be like a Henkel. Anyway, I have my stuff right here. This is some more shallots that I have cut up for the actual steak. I have some brunoise carrot, which is a really small dice. You can tell they're really nice and clean. And then what I have here is called a chiffonade. You take a leaf of something. It could be basil, it could be oregano, whatever the leaf is, and you roll it tight. And I'm just going to demonstrate a quick cut. And it's literally going as clean as you can. shaving it. Now, a lot of people don't realize keep the tip down. That's really important. Use your fingers as a guide, and you're basically, it's a fancy way to shred something. Now, this actually is bok choy. It's the leaves from the bok choy. I'm gonna wait until the rice is done, and I'm gonna add that for flavor and color. It has a little bit of bitterness to it, which will balance out that lemon thyme a little bit, and the carrots will add a little sugar. We're gonna stir that in right before it's done so it doesn't change the colors, and it'll give it a lot of vibrant color and actually add to the flavor. So that's kind of my garnish actually in the plate, but it'll enhance what we're doing. All right, what we're gonna do next is we're gonna take our bok choy. I washed it a little while ago. We want to make sure it's somewhat dry. Okay. We're going to take out herb Salee, and like I said, we went to a chef's convention, and we had the French Canadian Chefs Association came, and I went to a class where the guy was talking about what they do with all their dry herbs right before it gets really cold. They take everything and they put it in a pot, sometimes carrots and stuff, and they put it in there, and they grind that all up. And they save it throughout the winter so they have something to flavor with. So basically, it's kind of like a wet pesto would be one way to do it. And like I said, I have some oregano in there. I have ginger, garlic, some olive oil. Now, I flavor all my own oils. I do a infusion of oils. This is a lemongrass oil with a habanero pepper that's soaked into it with peppercorns, a little bit of basil, and I bring it up to a temperature and I let it sit, and I cook with that for the flavor. So what we're gonna do is I ground that up so it's easier to blend with everything, and we'll toss it together. We just wanna just get it nice and coated. And basically roasting is putting something in the oven, coating it with either dry seasoning or something wet. So we wanna get this seasoned nicely. There's a little salt and pepper in there as well. You can use any herbs you want. I mean, you can use dry if that's all you have. There's nothing wrong with that. It's important to know that you can experiment. You know what your flavors are, what you like. If you want more of an Asian flair, you can put a little more ginger in it. You can use a little soy sauce in there if you really wanted to, maybe a little bit of honey to make it sweeter. I want a little kick to it, so I actually have some homemade pickled jalapenos that I put in with this to grind up to give it a little kick because it is a spicy garlic and ginger. So it's nicely coated. We're gonna take it and then we're gonna put it on our lined pan and we're gonna lay it out. It's gonna take about 15 to 20 minutes to get it really nicely cooked and tender because we don't want the blackened, we don't want it burnt. We just want to make sure we get all those flavors in there. And by cutting it up this way, I basically used a Ninja to grind it up. If you want to do by hand, you could do it by hand as well. Either way is fine, but by having a blender or a grinder, it just makes it a little bit easier. And when you're cutting with fresh ginger, peeling it and chopping it, it's very fibrous, so sometimes people struggle cutting it. So if you can get in littler pieces and just chop it with a Ninja or a blender of some sort, it blends in a little bit easier. And I will say ginger lasts a while. This is actual organic and local ginger from Florida. I'm not sure the name of the farm it's grown, but I know it's within 100 miles of Leesburg. But it holds up for months if you keep it cold. And basically, when you looking at ginger, even if you're at the grocery store, when you open ginger, don't tell the grocery manager, but take it, break it in half, smell it. If it doesn't have a nice lemony or citrus smell to it and a little bit of yellow color to it, put it back and grab another one. Don't let them know that I told you that. But why should you buy something that is not worthy of your money? I believe in that completely. Understanding what you're buying is important, and I think a lot of people are afraid. As you're reading articles, people are very afraid of buying fresh vegetables because they're so used to canned stuff, and people are having to throw out their vegetables. That's kind of insane. So learn to use fresh stuff. It's valuable. It's more important. Now, I was talking about a little bit of history. So ginger obviously comes from Asia. So that's a little bit of an Asian influence. It's used in Caribbean food. It's used in Indian food. It's actually on the edge of where India is and that region, but it's part of Asia. So it gives it a flavor. Pepper also comes from the southeastern part of India, which is part of the Asian continent. And the biggest producer of pepper is actually Vietnam, which is partly what, when the French took over Vietnam and were colonized it, that's what they were growing there, because peppers at one time were extremely valuable. In the Roman times, a soldier would be paid a pound of pepper, and he could buy 2 wives with that pound of pepper. That's what his pay was. That's how valuable pepper was at one time. It's used in every single cuisine on the planet. Mustard also comes from Asia, which is used in a lot of different cuisines. We use it in hot dogs, obviously. The French use it when they make Grey Poupon, which is made with white wine. It influences a lot of different dressings that they make, a lot of different foods that they make. So as you can tell, it comes from a huge influence that's influenced the entire world. Rice obviously comes from Asia. Most countries do cook rice or some sort of rice. In the United States, Native Americans had a grain similar to rice. It's not really rice. If you get wild rice from Minnesota, it's similar. It is a grain, but it's not the same texture. It's a little more chewy. It takes a while to cook. You have to soak it overnight, almost like a dry bean. But the vitamins and the minerals in it are pretty phenomenal. So why did I choose French and Asian? They're both cuisines that are known throughout the world, number one. Number two, they use a lot of fresh stuff. It's something Americans can really learn from. We as in the United States, we're in a hurry for everything, and we rush to get everything done, and we want food now. Most countries, they serve the salad at the end of the meal. In most other countries, they serve the salad first, because the salad digests your body. In the United States, we want food, so we want it now, so we go in and we want our salad right this way. We have a salad bar. You won't find a salad bar in any other country. All right, so we have some really nice New Yorks. They are not completely organic. That's one of the few things I don't have that's completely organic. Me personally, I am not a grass-fed beef fan. It is definitely an acquired taste, something you have to get used to tasting. So this is an organic beef. Basically, what's the difference? It is fed corn for about a month before it's butchered. And the rest of the time, it's let out in the field to graze. They put the corn in, and it gives it some fat and marbling in it, as you can see the meat. A grass-fed meat, not that it doesn't have marbling, but it has more of a gamey flavor. So if you like hunting venison and stuff like that, grass-fed's actually okay. I'm just not a fan of it. So our spices, obviously, we have our salt. We like organic type salts. This is Himalayan salt. I have a brunoise of red pepper that we're going to use for the sauce to color it. We have some beef stock. I have a little bit of dried garlic to add some flavor. And what I did is, instead of using cream, for health reasons, we actually have milk. And what I did was I made a bechamel, which is a mother sauce. A bechamel is a simple thing. Take a little bit of onion, and you're basically making a sauce with that, with a little bit of cream, a little onion, shallots, a little white wine, sometimes a little bit of butter, and a flour, and you thicken it up. That's the base to macaroni and cheese. It's the base to a good Alfredo sauce. So I use milk because it has less fat. I like the fat from the butter we're going to use for the steak. So I made a bechamel. It's nice and creamy and has a nice sheen on it. So I made that ahead of time so that I have to work on it. You can use heavy cream right from the container to make the sauce. I chose not to. We're just checking the rice to see if it's come to a boil yet. It's not quite there. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our steak ready. So we have our steak sitting out. What we want to do is we want to season it a little bit. We're going to put a little bit of salt. Okay, people say how much is enough? My wife doesn't like salt. I happen to like salt, so we compromise. We put a little bit. Now the peppercorns, there's 2 ways to do peppercorns. You have a pepper grinder. I use the mortar and pestle. You can also put whole peppercorns in a Ziploc bag and take something and just smack it with a spoon or something like that to break them up. Because you want them cracked, you want big pieces. You don't want them really fine. That's really important, okay? You don't want really ground up because it's not going to taste the same. As I spoke in my last video, pepper is related to mint, so it has a very unique flavor. Most people don't realize black pepper is actually pretty spicy by itself. If you took a peppercorn, and I make my students eat spices and chew them to get the idea of it. So it does have a kick. That's why when Columbus came to the New World, somewhere along the line, either him or some other person went into the rainforest. They were in South America or Central America, and somebody gave them this berry, which was what we know of like a habanero, and they bit into it, and you can imagine, if you don't like spicy, what their face must have been like. It lit them up. You can have a pepper so hot that it'll take your breath away. I'm going to imagine that Columbus or whoever it was in that time period took a bite of that, and it lit him up and almost knocked him out, and the natives just sat there rolling on the floor laughing. And their first thought was it had a bite kind of like black pepper, and that's where we get the name pepper. But it's not peppers as like a habanero, jalapeno, and they're not actual peppers. So, but that's where we got it misnamed from. So we have our peppercorns. Now, I like mine spicy. My wife and son do not, so I'm going to make one a little bit better for me so that I can get that nice flavor, because it will have a little bit of a kick. Okay, we're going to wash our hands. The key to food is having a love of what you're doing. So understanding why you're doing it is important. More importantly, what you're trying to get out of it. So we have our stuff going. I have a little dried garlic that I'm just going to put on there just because I like that little bit of added flavor to it. I don't want a lot because I don't want to take away from what the dish is giving me, but I do want a little bit of that flavor. And I have just a tiny bit of flour that instead of dousing it, I just want to put a little bit on there. What this is going to do, it's going to coat the meat a little bit. It'll keep some of those juices in there. And we're going to pat it down. I don't want a lot because I'm not trying to make it a really heavy coating. Just a little bit will help kind of control that meat, help control a little bit of those spices, and it'll keep them in the meat when I go to sear it. But more importantly, what it's going to do is when I go to add the brandy and when I go to add the beef stock and I add the cream, it's what helps thicken the sauce. So I don't have to go back and try to make it thicker. And just a little bit will go a long way. You don't need a lot, like I said. You don't absolutely have to use flour, but you'll take you longer to cook down your sauce, and you would have to take your meat out of the pan before you make the sauce because it'll overcook the meat. Now, the temperature of meats varies from person to person. If it's good meat, you ask a chef, they're going to tell you you need to have your steak rare to medium rare. You should, if it's the right meat, you should also have your steak cooked to a fair temperature, depending on where you eat. And it is about opinion. Some people say if you cook a steak well done, you're going to ruin it. I disagree with that. Anyone that I personally says if you eat a steak well done, you ruin the meat, they don't know how to cook. Because if you cook a piece of meat properly, you could keep it juicy and it still be cooked where there's no pink in it. That's a skill. It's a talent. Certain meats, I prefer medium well. This New York, I will eat medium rare because I like that cut of beef a little bit more medium rare. A ribeye, I like more to the medium well because I want that fat cooked more and I like that flavor. I don't want the chewy red in it. Another misnomer is people claim that their steak has too much blood in it. Again, blood is not in the meat. Animals are completely, when they're butchered, they're drained of blood. So, we have our steak ready. We have our rice cooking. It's slowly coming to a boil. We're just going to leave that going. We have our vegetables completely seasoned, ready to go in the oven. We have our oven at 400 degrees. We have our mise en place, our shallots for the sauce for the steak, a little bit of carrots, and our chinois of bok choy, which is going to go in the rice to give it some flavor to balance it out. We have our brandy ready to go. We have our bechamel, our chicken, our beef stock, and a little bit of salt and pepper to add to it, and then a little bit of butter that we're going to put into the sauce. Okay, so our rice is almost done. So what I did was I turned it off while there's just some moisture in there. The heat will keep it going, and it'll start drying it out. We're going to keep it covered. So it'll continue to cook a little bit while we're getting everything else ready. We're going to take out bok choy. Our oven's nice and hot. We're going to put that inside, and we're going to get that roasting. We're going to turn our pan on our skillet. Again, I prefer iron. So we want to melt our butter. You could do clarified butter, which is where you melt down the butter and you separate the water and the fat. It's a little more involved. If you've ever went to a restaurant and had lobster, that's what they give you, is a broken down butter where it's just the middle of the butter. So if you took butter and microwave it, the top's going to look kind of white. You skim that off. The middle's what you want, and the bottom's all the water. So I prefer the flavor of the whole butter. We want to just get that melted, let that get nice and hot. We have our steaks ready to go, and we're gonna get them nice and seared. We want it smoking hot to get a nice sear on that meat. When you're cooking something longer, you cook it slower. If you want to cook it like a rare-ish, medium rare, you want your pan hot so it sears the outside and it keeps that nice center nice and moist, the flavors, and you'll get that nice coating on the outside, that Maillard reaction, which gives it flavor. So while we're waiting on that pan, we're talking about Asian influences. One of my favorite influences that come from Asia, it actually comes from Korea, is one of the main original places, is barley. I love beer. Without barley, we wouldn't have most of the beers that we have. Most people don't realize that. Beer, we think of Germany, we think of England, Ireland, Belgium. We think of all these places that have beer, and we forget that that influence came from Asian culture. So that's a huge piece of information that people don't know. Another thing people don't know about French cooking is, as most people think, because I owned a French restaurant called Petit Jardin, which is a French infused restaurant. I didn't do just French food. But most people think of French food, they think of elegance. And it can be very elegant. The most elegant of all foods is actually Russian service. The service is really elaborate. But we think of fine dining as French in particular. Julia Childs was really good about introducing it to American, the gourmet guy on TV. We've had a lot of influences from French people. The Culinary Institute of America is based off of European chefs that started in the late 60s in Connecticut, and then they moved into New York in the 70s. The American Culinary Federation, although it's American Culinary Federation, a lot of our heritage comes from French cuisine. But what most people don't know is back in the 1500s, between 15 and 1600s, it was the Italians that were the elaborate culinarians. And Catherine de' Medici is one of the ones that brought that when she married the king in France. She got married, she brought her chefs with her, and they were light years ahead of the French. And from that point, the French started to grow. And the French started to really take that under their wings. And then they introduced, in the 17th century, what's called haute cuisine, where it's the structure of foods, of serving food in systems. So years before that, what they would do is, even in other cultures, they just put everything on the table at one time and you ate it. Now we have systems. So like we have a rice dish that's cooking by itself. We have the vegetable cooking. We have our meat going. If we were going to serve an appetizer or something that would go first, it would be done in pieces. It's not just everything thrown on a table with whatever we had. There's a system behind it. And then from there, you go into where they started to study of the 5 mother sauces, and they got into more classical cuisine, all the way up into Escoffier, who pretty much spearheaded all those things and put a more structure for chefs. A lot of people don't realize what it takes to be a chef. You see people go to culinary school, they come out, they say, hey, I went to Johnson Wales, I'm a chef. It's a little bit more than that. Myself and many other older chefs went through apprenticeships. I did go to culinary school in Baltimore. Um, the butter's almost ready. It's almost brown. We want it just a little lightly browned. Um, you could see the vegetables are starting to wilt a little bit, but we want it nice and hot so it browns it and not wilt it, so we have a little crunch. But it's more involved than just going to school. When I got out of culinary school, I worked under a master chef. I was trained by the Europeans. And the master chef I trained under was from Germany at the time. They were one of the top chefs in the world. So remember, I have 4 friends from Germany that are all master chefs that are extremely talented. During my 5-year apprenticeship, it was basically a living hell. I remember turning a potato. It's taking a potato with a knife and getting 7 sides on it. Each side is a half an inch in the middle, a quarter inch on the bottoms, and it has to be equal, 7 or 9 sides. He would go through 150 potatoes, find one wrong, throw them in a pot and say, start again. Turn mushrooms, or he'd take a wooden spoon. I think that's why I like wood. My mom and dad used them on us. The chef used it on me, so I use it on the food. And it's a good memory of what I was brought up with. I laugh about that. I tell my students, I can't hit you and be glad, because when I was training, we were hit. Things were thrown at us. All right, so our pan is ready. You can see it's got a nice color. It's not burnt. It's got a nice color. You can't smell it, but you have a nice toasted butter smell. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our meat while it's there, and we are gonna get it seared. We're gonna turn it up a little bit so we get that nice sear going. And what we want is, we don't want to move that meat just yet. We want to just let it sit, and we're going to take that butter, we're going to move it around a little bit and just let it sear. Going to move our plates, wash our hands. One of my students one day said to me, Chef, we never see you wash your hands. And another student said, actually, you never see them stop. I do wash my hands thousands of times. This coronavirus is a time that we need to be really cautious about how we deal with things. In history, originally they didn't have heat to cook food. People didn't have the things we did. If you were in high school in New York or middle school in New York, you definitely read a book called The Jungle. In Florida, they read it in like 11th or 12th grades if they're lucky. And The Jungle's about the meat packing plants and how bad things were. It was quite awful. We didn't have sanitized things at that time. Unfortunately, our government does a lot that they keep going because of things that happened during that time period years ago. And we don't need, like, milk isn't something we absolutely have to have. If you like milk, that's fine. But you can drink unpasteurized milk if you have a cow yourself. You just have to be smart about it. Obviously, buying it from a store is a little bit different. Okay, so we're going to turn that back down now. I can see it starting to sear a little bit. We don't want it. We just want to look at it. It's starting to get a nice color, but we want to let that brown really nice until I see the juices come up on the top of the meat. So we're going to give it about 2 more minutes. My wife likes her steaks very rare. I like them medium rare to medium. Ryan, my stepson, likes it like medium to medium well, and that's fine. So we're going to get them all about medium rare to medium, and I think everybody will be happy with that. So while we're waiting on that, like I said, we have our mise en place for everything right here. We're going to make some room over, because one of the other things that we require for my students is they're learning to plate. When I was at Johnson Wales last summer, I had a instructor, Chef Flater, great guy, extremely intelligent, one of the smartest chefs I've ever personally met. Whoever has his class, you guys are truly blessed. He's remarkably funny, intelligent, innovative, and knowledgeable. Anyway, we were doing a plating class at Johnson Wales for teachers, and he used the term negative space. And it's funny because I've been cooking for going on 40 years, and although I knew that in my brain, I never thought of a term for it. So we're going to actually work on showing a little bit on how to plate something. I brought out some black plates because of some of the colors we're going to use. They're actually like a brownish black. I like the shape of them, but not everything works with that. Round is okay. If you're going to use round, you don't want round portions. You want more symmetrical type portions. Height is good if it fits. If you don't have something to get it high, don't try to build something this high because it's not really edible, although it looks nice. So we have our thing. We're going to go ahead and we are going to turn our steaks. You can see the juices coming out of it. We're going to go in the middle and you're going to see a nice crispy coating on the outside. See how pretty that is? It's nice crust. Beautiful. Okay, that's what we want. We want that fat to caramelize, the Maillard reaction to get it nice and brown. Okay. Some people will say I can't do that. Well, part of it is the utensils and the equipment you use. If you have a cast iron skillet or an iron pan of some sort, it holds the heat better. It's more uniform. It goes through it better, cooks more evenly. Whereas stainless steel works, but it doesn't hold the heat and it's thinner and it'll burn before it'll actually get through it. So this will hold the heat while a little bit longer. We have our rice. We're going to go ahead and take the lid off. And you can see it's got some nice color in it. It's starting to get flaked. Okay. You can see how the grains are starting to separate a little bit. That's what we want. We want that moisture out of there so we can plate it better. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the rice ready. We're going to give it a stir. Let some of that moisture out of there. Okay. If you open it up too soon, it'll get more sticky. You want to let that continue to steam and then slowly release it out. Okay. Now we're going to add our chiffonade of bok choy. And it'll cook in there. I'm really doing it for a little bit of the bitterness from the bok choy, the vitamin content, and the color. It really is what it's about. It's giving a little more flavor. You can dice it, mince it, however you want to do it. We're going to add a little bit of carrots in there. Now, while we're letting that sit, we're going to take our steaks and we're going to pull them out just for a second. And we're going to finish them in a minute in the pan. So I'm just taking them out so I don't overcook them, as they're right at rare. Some people will say, I don't know how to tell if the meat's ready. Well, I can tell you, don't ever. We're going to take a little bit of that butter out. We're going to discard it. We want to save some of it, though. Okay, we have just a little bit in there. Whatever you do not stick something inside the meat. All that will do is it'll cause the meat to lose its juice, and that's horrible. Okay? Okay, we're going to add just a little bit of the garlic in there, powdered garlic. You don't want too much. I'm going to put just a little bit of pepper in there with that little bit of pepper. Okay? We have our brandy. Okay, you can use mushrooms in this if you really want to. But traditionally it's brandy. Now, this is not a gas stove, so it will not flame, but it'll still cook out. Okay? You can light it if you want, but you don't have to. If you're in a restaurant and you're doing it tableside, absolutely light it because it's part of the show, but it doesn't change the flavor. That's really important to know. You don't have to have a gas stove to do it. All right? So we want to cook it till you get that alcohol smell out of it. It'll almost like make your eyes water when you first put it in, almost acidic-like. That's what we want out of it. We want to let that reduce down. And what that does, it releases on the bottom. That's called the fond. That's the flavor, man. That's what we really want. It's the best part of it. You know, it's kind of like licking the spoon when you're baking a pie or a cake. Getting to lick that spoon before you finish it. You're getting that best piece in there. So we want to let that cook down just a little bit. And once it reduces and you don't get that burning sensation in your nose, okay, we're going to add a little bit of beef stock, okay? And we're going to add our bechamel. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a little whip I hate the word whisk. That's a Martha Stewart, Rachel Ray thing. In the kitchen, we call it a whip. That's truly what it is. We whip things up. We don't whisk them. That's just me personally. Okay, so we're going to put our bechamel in there. All right, let that cook in. Now, something I like to add to mine. We want to let that come up to a boil, so we're going to turn it up a little bit, and it'll start to thicken up on its own. Something I like to add, depending on what you like in your food, I like just a little bit of mustard. If you don't have Grey Poupon, it's okay. Mustard comes from China, so no matter what kind of mustard you use, there's the Asian influence in it. Okay, so we're gonna put just a little. I just put like about a half a teaspoon in it. It'll give a little acidity to it, and it'll blend with the other stuff that we're doing. You can use Grey Poupon, about a tablespoon of mustard. Okay, let that cook up. We're gonna let that cook down. Our vegetables are just about ready. Nice color. Little crispness on the edge. Tender, but not burnt. That's a huge piece of it. Okay, we're gonna stir up our rice to give it that color. Okay, now you can do it any way you want. If you really feel like you have a need and you want to shape something, there's definitely different things you can use. Whatever you have will work. Okay, what we're gonna do is now we're just gonna put it on there. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time. Okay. All right, so we have our Au Poivre. We're going to use a little bit of the red pepper for some color. It'll give it a nice little texture. You got some nice green on there. The rice has some nice color in it. There's room on the plate. If you're really picky, well, in the restaurant, you better be picky. At home, though, if you make a little drip on there, that's not going to hurt anybody. In the restaurant, they'll use a little towel to make sure there's nothing on it. Notice, though, like this plate, there's room all the way around the plate. Nothing, it's centered. So you got a little bit of height, some nice colors. You could use a white plate, red plate, any color plate you want, but you have some nice colors. So we have our steak au poivre, a rice pilaf with lemon thyme, our ginger and garlic roasted bok choy, and has lots of flavors with a lot of history in it. So technically you could say that pretty much the foods and some of their ideas come from Asia. The French honed a lot of the skills, and the Italians also had a hand in on it. And we get to enjoy great beer and wine because of Asia and France. So overall, it's a win-win for everybody. Bon appetit and enjoy your meal and continue to cook and be safe.